"You're a disgrace to this hall, Samuel," the new director's voice boomed. The old janitor just kept polishing the brass railing, his worn-out uniform a mark of shame. No one knew the secret pin to his chest. The Ethelred Concert Hall was a temple built for sound. Before the first musician arrived, before the faintest note was played, the hall belonged to Samuel Jones. For 40 years, he had been its first and last inhabitant of the day. As the head custodian, he moved through the pre-dawn silence not like a cleaner, but like a priest performing sacred rites. He knew the specific groan of the third-row seat in the mezzanine, the exact spot on the stage where the cello's endpin would resonate best, the way the dust motes danced like tiny sprites in the light from the grand chandeliers. Samuel, at 72, was as much a part of the hall as the velvet on the seats. He was a small, quiet man, with a gentle stoop to his shoulders and hands that, despite their age, were remarkably nimble. His uniform, a simple set of gray work clothes, was washed so many times it had faded to the color of a winter sky. Pinned to the lapel of his worn jacket was a small, tarnished metal pin, its design obscured by time. It was so unremarkable that it was essentially invisible. The hall's new director of operations, Julian Croft, noticed it. He noticed everything that didn't fit his vision. Julian, barely 30, had arrived 6 months ago like a discordant brass fanfare in a library. With an MBA from a prestigious school and a wardrobe of razor-sharp suits, he saw the Ethelred not as a temple for art, but as a brand to be optimized. And Samuel, in his faded uniform, was an unacceptable flaw in that brand. Samuel, Julian's voice, crisp and cold, would echo across the marble lobby. "That uniform is an embarrassment. This is a world-class institution. Our patrons pay thousands for a ticket. They expect excellence in every detail." Samuel would simply nod, his eyes, the color of faded denim, showing no offense. He would just continue his work, polishing a brass handle until it shone like a new gold coin. The first few times, it was about the uniform. Then, Julian's criticism became more personal. "And that pin," he sneered one afternoon, gesturing toward Samuel's lapel. "What is that supposed to be? Some prize from a cereal box? It's tacky. Lose it." The musicians, the stagehands, the ushers, the ones who have been there for decades, would watch these exchanges with quiet discomfort. They treated Samuel with a kind of unspoken reverence. The first-chair violinist, a woman who had performed for royalty, always saved a section of her newspaper for him. The gruffest stagehand always made sure the service elevator was waiting for Samuel at the end of his long shift. They didn't know why. It was an instinct, a feeling that the old janitor was more than he appeared. Julian felt no such instinct. He saw only a shabby old man who needed to be managed, an unsightly cog in his perfectly polished marketing machine. He saw Samuel's silence not as dignity, but as weakness. And every time Samuel failed to react, Julian's arrogance grew, louder and more grating, a truly dissonant note in a hall built for harmony. Julian Croft believed the soul of the Ethelred Hall lived in its glossy brochures and sold-out performances. Samuel Jones knew it lived in a room no one ever visited. Down a narrow flight of stairs, behind an unmarked door in the sub-basement, was the archives. It wasn't a room so much as a tomb of forgotten beauty. Here, shelves overflowed with history, stacks of original vinyl recordings, their covers brittle with age, signed manuscripts from composers long dead, the ink faded but the genius still vibrant, boxes of photographs of visiting artists, their youthful faces full of hope and ambition. This was Samuel's true work. Every Saturday, on his day off, he would descend into the quiet dust. He didn't just clean, he curated. With tools he bought from his own meager pension, he would meticulously repair the torn covers of ancient scores. He'd wear white cotton gloves to handle the delicate photographs, gently wiping away a half-century of grime to reveal the smiling face of a guest cellist or a visiting soprano. He had built a small, climate-controlled cabinet himself to store the most fragile recordings. He spent hours digitizing the old reel-to-reel tapes, preserving the ghosts of performances that would otherwise have been lost to time. He was the hall's silent guardian, the unpaid keeper of its soul, performing a sacred duty no one had asked him to do, and no one knew he was doing. Upstairs, in the world of spreadsheets and marketing meetings, Julian's campaign against him was escalating. A memo was circulated, a new standard of professional appearance. It outlined a strict new dress code for all staff, with a pointed clause about maintaining a clean, modern, and unadorned uniform at all times. It was aimed directly at Samuel and his tarnished little pin. "He's a relic," Julian complained to his assistant. "This place needs to look forward, not backward. How can we attract a new generation of patrons when our own staff looks like something out of a Dickens novel?" One evening, as the orchestra was rehearsing a complex new piece, the lead harpist broke a string. It was a rare, imported string, and the spare was locked in a supply room to which only Julian had the key. Julian had already left for the day. The rehearsal ground to a halt. As the musicians packed up, frustrated, Samuel appeared from the shadows with a small, worn leather pouch. He approached the multi-million-dollar instrument, and with a deftness that seemed impossible for his age, he produced a perfect replacement string. He nodded and tuned it in under 5 minutes, his touch on the instrument both reverent and deeply familiar. The harpist stared, speechless. How did you know how to do that?" Samuel just gave a small, sad smile. "Some things, you don't forget." He then picked up his dustpan and broom and quietly went back to work, leaving a wake of silent astonishment behind him. The day of the season opening gala was the most important day of the year at the Ethelred. It was the day Julian Croft lived for, a night of champagne, evening gowns, and the city's most influential patrons. He had spent the afternoon striding through the hall like a general before a battle, barking orders and ensuring every detail was flawless. The final dress rehearsal was underway. The full orchestra was on stage, the air electric with the tension of the impending performance. In the middle of a powerful crescendo, Julian spotted Samuel on the edge of the stage, quietly polishing the brass music stand on the conductor's podium. For Julian, it was the final straw. The sight of that shabby gray uniform, in his perfect, stage-lit world, on this most important of days, made something in him snap. He strode onto the stage, his expensive leather shoes clicking loudly in the sudden silence as the conductor lowered his baton. He stopped directly in front of Samuel, positioning himself so the entire orchestra of over 100 musicians had a clear view. "What do you think you are doing?" Julian's voice was low, but it carried the sharp edge of fury. Samuel straightened up slowly. "Just polishing the podium, sir. For tonight." "Polishing it?" Julian let out a short, cruel laugh. "You are the smudge on this podium. Look at you. You are a disgrace to this hall, Samuel." The words echoed in the vast, silent space. The musicians froze, bows hovering over strings, eyes wide with shock. The conductor stood motionless. It was a public execution of a man's dignity. "We are selling an image of prestige, of perfection." Julian continued, his voice rising, feeding on the captive audience. "And you are the opposite of that. An old man in a janitor's outfit who can't even be bothered to look presentable. This is your final warning. Conform to the new standard, or you are finished here." Samuel didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't even look at Julian. His gaze was fixed somewhere far away. He simply picked up his polishing cloth, placed it neatly in his bucket, and turned. With the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on him, he walked slowly off the stage and disappeared into the shadows of the wings. His back was straight, his pace unhurried. It wasn't the walk of a shamed man, but of a king leaving his own court. Julian stood on the stage, breathing heavily, a triumphant glint in his eye. He thought he had finally won. He thought he had made his point and established his absolute authority. He had no idea he had just committed an act of sacrilege in front of the very priests of this temple. The gala was a glittering success. The city's elite filled the velvet seats, their diamonds competing with the grand chandeliers. But the real star of the evening was the man on the podium, Maestro Nikolai Volkov. Volkov was a living legend, a titan of the classical world. A Russian maestro of the old school, he was famously reclusive and even more famously demanding. To be conducted by Volkov was the highest honor, to be dismissed by him was a career-ending disgrace. His presence on the stage made the very air in the hall feel charged and sacred. The concert was magnificent. The orchestra, under Volkov's masterful command, had never sounded better. They reached the final movement of the symphony, a piece known for its thundering, emotional climax. The music swelled, filling every corner of the hall, a wave of pure, transcendent sound. And then, it stopped. At the very peak of the crescendo, Maestro Volkov lowered his baton. The sound vanished as if swallowed by a vacuum. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Musicians looked at each other in confusion and panic. Had someone played a wrong note? Had the maestro fallen ill? Volkov stood perfectly still, his back to the audience. He wasn't looking at his orchestra. He was looking past them, into the shadows of the stage left wing. There, almost hidden behind a velvet curtain, stood Samuel, watching the performance, a lone, quiet figure in his clean but faded gray work uniform. Slowly, deliberately, Volkov laid his baton down on the podium. He turned and walked off the platform, his steps silent and purposeful. He crossed the stage, past the stunned first violinist, past the principal cellist, directly toward the old janitor. The audience held its breath. Julian Croft, sitting in the front row, felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. Volkov stopped a few feet from Samuel. His sharp, discerning eyes, which had critiqued the world's greatest musicians, fell upon the small, tarnished pin on Samuel's lapel. He studied it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, the legendary maestro Nikolai Volkov, the emperor of the classical music world, did something no one had ever seen him do. He drew himself up to his full height and, before the silent janitor, he bowed. It wasn't a simple nod. It was a deep, formal, reverent bow from the waist, a gesture of ultimate respect reserved for an equal, or a master. A stunned silence held the hall for a heartbeat. Then, the concertmaster, the lead violinist, slowly raised his bow. He didn't play. He gently tapped the tip against his music stand. Tap. Tap. It was a signal. Across the stage, musician after musician did the same. The gentle tapping of 100 boson-wood filled the hall, a soft, percussive rustle, the orchestra's highest and most sacred salute. It was an honor guard of sound. In the front row, the color drained from Julian's face. He sat frozen, a statue of pure horror, as the truth of what he had done finally began to dawn on him. The next day, the Ethelred Hall was not buzzing about the gala's success, but about the maestro's bow. The mystery of the old janitor had become an obsession. Young musicians, fluent in the language of the internet, began digging. By noon, the discovery had been made. A young horn player, on his phone in the break room, shouted, "I found him. Oh my God, you have to see this." A crowd gathered around his screen. It was a grainy, black and white video from a bygone era, uploaded from a dusty archive. The title read, Queen Elizabeth Competition Finals, 1973. The video showed a young man with intense, familiar denim blue eyes and a shock of dark hair, sitting at a grand piano. His hands didn't just play the music, they unleashed it. The piece was a brutally difficult Rachmaninoff concerto, and he performed it with a power and passion that was breathtaking, even through the tinny old speakers. At the end of the performance, the announcer's voice, in French, declared the gold medal winner, the brilliant new master, Samuel Jones. The news spread through the hall like wildfire. Samuel Jones wasn't just a janitor. He was a legend. A prodigy who had won the piano world's most grueling and prestigious competition, and then, vanished. The story started to surface, whispered in corridors and shared over coffee. The elderly librarian remembered. His career ended a year after that. A car accident. It didn't cripple him, but it damaged the nerves in his left hand. Not enough to stop him from living, but just enough to stop him from being perfect. So he gave it all up. Came here for a simple job, just to be near the music. The first-chair violinist, her face pale, added her piece. The Ethelred Angel Scholarship, the anonymous one that's been funding a gifted young musician from a poor neighborhood every year for the last 30 years. I saw the paperwork once. The trust is funded by an S. Jones. Julian Croft heard it all. He sat in his glass-walled office, the sounds of the orchestra rehearsing filtering through, but he wasn't listening. He was replaying every sneering comment, every arrogant dismissal, every act of public humiliation he had inflicted on Samuel. He had called a man who anonymously funded scholarships a disgrace. He had belittled the hands that had once conquered Rachmaninoff. He had tried to strip a tarnished pin from the chest of a king who had willingly chosen a life of quiet service over fame. The weight of his own ignorance was crushing, a shame so profound it felt like a physical illness. He had spent his life chasing an image of prestige, only to realize he had been standing in the presence of the real thing all along, and had done nothing but try to tarnish it. Guilt was a poor excuse for inaction. Julian knew an apology was inadequate, but it was necessary. It took him 2 hours to find the courage, and another hour to find Samuel. He wasn't in the gleaming concert hall, but in the sub-basement, in the dusty, forgotten archives. The door was slightly ajar. Julian pushed it open and stepped into the quiet, musty room. Samuel was at a long wooden table, wearing a pair of white cotton gloves. He was meticulously cleaning an old vinyl record with a soft cloth, his movements gentle and full of care. He looked up as Julian entered, his expression calm and unsurprised. "Samuel." Julian's voice, usually so confident and commanding, was a dry, hesitant croak. The grand apology he had rehearsed in his head evaporated. In the face of Samuel's quiet dignity, words felt cheap. "I came to. I am so sorry." Samuel placed the record carefully back into its sleeve. He didn't say, "It's all right." He didn't say, "I forgive you." He just looked at Julian, his pale blue eyes holding a universe of experience, and said, "There is a great deal of work to be done here." The simple, factual statement was more powerful than any absolution or condemnation. It wasn't about the past, it was about the present. It was about the work. Julian looked around at the towering shelves of history, at the legacy Samuel had been protecting in silence for decades. He swallowed the lump of shame in his throat. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. It was the first honest question he had asked since he'd arrived at the hall. Samuel considered him for a long moment. Then, he nodded toward a stack of cardboard boxes in the corner. "Those are first-edition recordings from the 1950s. They need to be catalogued before the sleeves degrade completely." He handed Julian a fresh pair of cotton gloves and a ledger. "The story ends there, but it doesn't really end. It ends with the two men, the young, humble director and the old, legendary master, working side by side in the quiet, dusty archive. It ends not with a grand speech of forgiveness, but with a shared, silent task. Because sometimes the most profound lessons are never spoken. And sometimes, the greatest redemption is found not in asking for forgiveness, but in picking up a cloth and starting the work." Julian judged a book by its cover and made a huge mistake. We all do it sometimes. What do you think is the best way to make amends after realizing you've deeply wronged someone? Share your thoughts in the comments, and as always, let's comment with respect for each other's experiences. If this story strikes a chord with you, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and share it with the world.